Welcome to Pam Jammer's Regression Tales. We post new stories every week, so be sure to subscribe, like, and share to stay updated. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. Mother Knows Best. Chapter 1: Tension at the Stately Home. Lars shifted uncomfortably in the passenger seat as Laura guided their car down the winding driveway to her mother's stately home. The house stood like a monument to tradition, imposing yet warm, with its brick facade framed by perfectly trimmed hedges. Margaret, Laura's widowed mother, was a retired nurse with a commanding presence and an unwavering sense of order. She also controlled the trust fund that supported Laura and Lars, making her approval all the more essential. Laura glanced over at Lars, noticing his furrowed brow and the way he fidgeted with the hem of his shirt. "Relax," she said softly, resting a reassuring hand on his knee. "Mom's a little intense, sure, but she just wants what's best for everyone." Lars tried to smile but couldn't quite manage it. Ever since the car accident several months ago, he'd been grappling with bladder control issues. Despite wearing protective pads or pull-ups, leaks had become a frustratingly common occurrence, and the thought of staying in Margaret's immaculate home filled him with anxiety. "I just don't want to mess this up," Lars muttered, keeping his gaze on the pristine hedges lining the driveway. "Your mom's already skeptical of me, and..." "You're not going to mess anything up," Laura interrupted firmly. "And even if something happens, we'll handle it together. Okay?" Lars nodded, though her words did little to ease his nerves. He glanced down at the pull-up he wore under his pants, silently praying it would be enough. As they parked and stepped out, Margaret greeted them at the door with her usual no-nonsense demeanor. Tall and poised, with sharp features softened only slightly by her smile, she was every bit the retired nurse, efficient, attentive, and utterly composed. "Laura, Lars, so good to see you both," Margaret said briskly, ushering them inside. Lars was immediately struck by the pristine condition of the home. The floors gleamed, the rugs looked untouched, and the furniture seemed almost too perfect to sit on. His nerves prickled as Margaret led them on a brief tour, ending in a guest bedroom. The room was simple but comfortable, with a large bed, a modest dresser, and a padded armchair in the corner. "You'll be staying here," Margaret announced, her tone clipped but kind. "It should be comfortable enough, and it's close to the bathroom if you need it." Lars flushed at the subtle implication but nodded. "Thank you, Margaret. It's perfect." Laura shot him a quick, encouraging look before they began unpacking. The first evening passed uneventfully, though Lars found it hard to relax under Margaret's watchful gaze. She asked pointed questions about his recovery, her tone laced with concern, but also with an edge of scrutiny that made him shift uncomfortably in his chair. Chapter 2: A Stain of Humiliation. The next morning, over breakfast, Lars couldn't shake the tension that had followed him since their arrival. Margaret's kitchen was spotless, the table set with perfect precision, and the faint smell of coffee mingled with the scent of freshly baked bread. Everything about her home seemed designed to make him acutely aware of his every movement. As they ate, Lars felt the familiar discomfort of a full bladder creeping up on him. He excused himself and hurried to the bathroom. When he returned, Margaret was talking about her late husband, recalling his final years and the challenges of caregiving. Lars listened politely, though the subject made him feel even more self-conscious. Later that afternoon, the unthinkable happened. While sitting in Margaret's plush living room on an expensive-looking armchair, Lars felt the warmth spreading before he realized what was happening. The pull-up hadn't been enough, and a damp stain began to spread across the fabric of the chair. Panic set in as he quickly stood, trying to hide the evidence, but the damage was already done. "Lars," Margaret said sharply, her eyes narrowing as she noticed his distress. "What happened?" I'm so sorry," Lars stammered, his face flushing with embarrassment. "I didn't mean to, my protection didn't hold." Margaret sighed deeply, pinching the bridge of her nose before regaining her composure. "Laura, could you help clean this up?" "Lars, go to the guest room and wait there." Lars nodded miserably, hurrying out of the room. He could hear Laura and Margaret talking in hushed tones, but he didn't dare linger to catch their words. Chapter 3, Margaret's Firm Solution. Not long after, Margaret entered the guest room carrying a stack of thick, white diapers. Lars stared at them in disbelief, his face burning with shame. "Lars," Margaret began, her tone firm but not unkind, "I know this is uncomfortable for you, but it's clear that the protection you've been using isn't sufficient. These are far more absorbent and will prevent any further accidents." "Wait, diapers?" Lars asked, his voice barely above a whisper.
I don't think I need those."
"Lars, this isn't about what you think you need," Margaret said matter-of-factly. "This is about protecting my furniture, my home, and your dignity. Now, I'm not asking you, I'm telling you. You'll wear these going forward." "But," Lars began to protest, but Margaret cut him off with a raised hand. "I took care of my husband for years," she said, her voice tinged with authority. "This is not up for debate. Laura and I will help you get adjusted if necessary." Lars's heart raced as Margaret set the stack of diapers on the bed in the guest room. Laura entered the room shortly after, her expression a mix of sympathy and agreement. "Mum's right," she said gently. "We'll make this easier for you, I promise." Margaret handed him one of the bulky diapers. "I'll give you some privacy to put this on. But Lars," she added, her gaze sharp, "if you don't put it on correctly, I'll be checking to make sure it's secure." As she left the room, Lars stared at the diaper in his hands, feeling overwhelmed and humiliated. With shaking hands, he attempted to put it on himself, but the fit was loose and awkward, the tapes not properly secured. When Margaret returned to check on him, she took one look and shook her head. "This won't do," she said firmly. "From now on, Laura or I will assist you to make sure it's done properly. Otherwise, it defeats the purpose." Chapter 4, Dressed for Practicality. Lars sat on the edge of the guest room bed, his face flushed with embarrassment as Margaret assessed his poorly secured diaper. The tapes were uneven, and the gaps at the sides made it clear it wouldn't hold up under any strain. Laura stood quietly behind her mother, watching with a mixture of concern and agreement. "Lars," Margaret began in her no-nonsense tone, "this isn't a joke. If this diaper isn't fitted properly, it'll leak, and we'll have the same problem as before, or worse." Lars opened his mouth to protest, but Margaret cut him off with a wave of her hand. "I understand you're new to this, but from now on, Laura or I will be the ones to put it on you. It's not just about convenience, it's about hygiene and making sure you're comfortable." Laura stepped forward, her voice soft but firm. "Mom's right, Lars. We don't want another accident, and you shouldn't have to deal with the stress of trying to figure it out yourself. It'll be easier this way." Lars felt like the ground had been pulled out from under him. The thought of someone else diapering him, especially his wife or her mother, was mortifying. But the stern look on Margaret's face made it clear there was no room for negotiation. "Fine," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "Good," Margaret said briskly. "Now, let's make sure it's done correctly this time." She grabbed a fresh diaper from the stack and spread it out on the bed. Without waiting for Lars to respond, she gestured for him to lie down. Lars hesitated, glancing at Laura, who gave him an encouraging nod. Swallowing his pride, he lay back on the bed, his face burning. Margaret worked with calm efficiency, sliding the thick diaper beneath Lars and adjusting it with practiced precision. Reaching for a tube of diaper rash cream, she squeezed some onto her fingers and began to gently rub it into his private areas. "This is important," she explained in her no-nonsense tone, "to prevent rashes and keep your skin healthy. Trust me, you'll be glad we're doing this." Lars stared at the ceiling, trying to ignore the awkwardness of the moment, but to his horror, his body betrayed him. He felt a rush of heat and tension as his body responded involuntarily with excitement. His cheeks burned as he stammered, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean." Margaret glanced at him, her expression calm and clinical. "Relax, Lars," she said evenly, her tone not changing at all. It's a natural reaction. This used to happen with my husband all the time when I was caring for him. It's nothing to be embarrassed about, it just means you're healthy. Laura, standing nearby, couldn't help but stifle a laugh. Oh, Lars, she said with a playful grin. I think Mom's seen it all. Don't worry, she's a professional. Laura. Lars groaned, mortified as he covered his face with his hands. Margaret simply continued her work, unbothered, finishing the application of the cream and dusting a light layer of powder over him. There, she said briskly, securing the diaper with practiced ease. All fresh and protected. Lars sat up, feeling the bulk between his legs and the crinkling sound with every movement. It's a lot thicker than what I'm used to, he said awkwardly. That's the point, Margaret replied. These are designed to handle much more than those pads or pull-ups you've been using. Trust me, you'll appreciate them when they prevent another mess. Lars stood up, intending to put his pants back on, but he quickly realized they wouldn't fit over the bulk of the diaper. I can't wear these, he said, holding up his pants. They're too tight. Margaret didn't miss a beat. That's fine. I'll grab something more suitable. She left the room and returned moments later with a short pink dress. The hemline stopped well above the knees, falling to Lars's upper thighs, leaving most of the diaper clearly visible. Lars stared at it, horrified. That's a dress. It's similar to a hospital gown, Margaret said matter-of-factly, holding it up. I used to put my husband in these when he was in diapers. It's practical, comfortable, and ensures easy access for changes. Now stop acting childish and put it on. But, Lars started to protest, only for Margaret to fix him with a steely glare. No buts, she said sharply. Grow up and be responsible. This is for everyone's sake, including yours. Laura stepped in, her voice soothing. Lars, it's really not a big deal. It's just temporary while we figure things out, okay? Mom's right, it's about practicality. Reluctantly, Lars slipped the dress over his head, the hem barely covering the thick diaper. The soft fabric and loose fit felt strangely comfortable, but the embarrassment of wearing it in front of Margaret and Laura made his face burn. You look fine, Margaret said briskly. Now let's focus on keeping everything clean and dry. As Lars shifted awkwardly, the crinkling sound of the diaper and the swish of the dress seemed to amplify his humiliation. Lars sighed, feeling the weight of the situation settle over him. As much as he wanted to resist, he knew there was no turning back now. Chapter 5, Laura's Plea for Appreciation. Later that day, Lars sat on the edge of the guest bed, feeling the thick diaper shift beneath him with every movement. The pink dress Margaret had picked out for him barely covered the tops of his thighs, leaving the bulky diaper unmistakably visible. He had tried to argue, but Margaret had simply waved him off with her usual matter-of-factness. This is for practicality, Lars, she'd said. You'll get used to it. Laura entered the room carrying a small laundry basket. She glanced at him and gave a sympathetic smile. Hey, she said softly, sitting beside him. How are you holding up? Lars sighed, running a hand through his hair. I feel ridiculous, Laura. I know your mom means well, but this is a lot. And the dress, do I really need to wear this? Laura rested her hand on his arm. I know it's not easy, Lars. But Mom's doing this because she cares. She's gone out of her way to make sure you're comfortable and healthy. I think, she paused, choosing her words carefully, you could show her a little more appreciation. Lars blinked at her, surprised. I appreciate her, he said defensively. It's hard to express that when I feel so embarrassed. Laura smiled gently, squeezing his arm. I get it. But she's gone above and beyond for you. She didn't have to let us stay here or use all these supplies she's kept from caring for my dad. And honestly, she's probably the only person who could handle this situation so calmly. Think about what she's done today alone, helping you with the diaper rash cream, making sure everything fits properly, even finding you something to wear. That's a lot of effort, Lars. He lowered his gaze, feeling a pang of guilt. You're right. I just don't know how to thank her without it feeling awkward. Laura leaned in closer, her voice soft but firm. Start with the small things. Say thank you when she changes you. Tell her you appreciate her taking care of you. It doesn't have to be some grand gesture, just let her know you see her effort. Lars nodded slowly, letting her words sink in. I'll try, he said finally. Laura smiled, leaning over to kiss his cheek. Good. I think she'll really appreciate that. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Margaret stepped in, carrying a tray with a steaming cup of tea and a plate of sandwiches. Thought you might want something to eat, she said briskly, setting the tray on the bedside table. She glanced at Lars, her expression softening slightly. How are you settling in, Lars? Lars hesitated, feeling Laura's expectant gaze on him. Taking a deep breath, he looked up at Margaret. Thank you, Margaret, he said earnestly. For everything. I know this isn't easy for you either, and I really appreciate all that you're doing to help. Margaret's eyebrows lifted in surprise, but a small smile tugged at her lips. Well, she said, her tone softening, it's nice to hear that. I know this isn't easy for you either, Lars. But we'll get through it together. Laura beamed at him, clearly pleased. See? She whispered as Margaret left the room. That wasn't so hard, was it? Lars managed a small smile, feeling a glimmer of relief. For the first time since arriving, he felt a little less out of place, knowing that his gratitude had been noticed. Chapter 6, Morning Routine. The next morning, Lars woke to the sound of Margaret moving around in the kitchen. The smell of coffee and breakfast wafted through the house, and he couldn't help but feel the now familiar bulk of the diaper beneath him as he shifted in the bed. He glanced down at the pink dress Margaret had left out for him last night, still neatly folded on a nearby chair. Morning, Lars, Laura greeted softly, walking into the room carrying a fresh set of diapers. She smiled at him gently, her tone light. Mom says it's time to get you up and ready for the day. Lars groaned, sitting up and rubbing his face. I guess I don't have a choice, do I? Laura chuckled. Not really. Besides, Mom wants to make sure you're comfortable and protected. You don't want any more accidents, right? He shook his head, reluctantly lying back on the bed as Laura set out the changing supplies Margaret had prepared. Just as she was about to begin, Margaret walked in, her no-nonsense demeanor as present as ever. Good morning, she said briskly, looking over Lars. Laura, let me handle this. I need to show you the best way to avoid leaks, it's all about the fit. Lars turned bright red, his embarrassment overwhelming as Margaret took charge. Laura stepped aside, watching with curiosity as her mother confidently undid the tapes on his diaper and began the change. Margaret moved efficiently, applying a generous amount of diaper rash cream and powder before positioning a fresh, thick diaper beneath him. Now, Lars, she said, her tone firm but not unkind, I know this might feel awkward, but it's important to do this properly. A loose fit is a recipe for disaster. Laura nodded along, clearly taking mental notes. Makes sense, she said with a small smile. We don't want to risk any leaks. Margaret expertly secured the tapes, checking the snugness of the fit before sitting back with a satisfied look. There we go. All set, she said, giving Lars a quick pat on the diaper. Now, let's get you dressed. She handed Laura the pink dress from the chair, and Laura helped Lars into it while Margaret stepped out of the room. Once the dress was on, Laura stood back, looking him over with a playful smile. You look cute, she teased, adjusting the hem of the dress, which barely covered the top of his thighs. Mom really knows how to pick something practical. Lars groaned, glancing at his reflection in the nearby mirror. This is so embarrassing. Maybe, Laura said with a grin. But it's also kind of adorable. Before Lars could protest further, Margaret called out from the kitchen. Breakfast is ready. Lars, hurry up, we've got a lot to discuss today. Chapter 7, House Rules. Over breakfast, Margaret laid out her plans for the week. She had decided that it would be best for Laura and Lars to stay for an extended period while Lars adjusted to his new routine. "I still think the guest room is fine for now," Margaret said, sipping her coffee, "but I'd like to move Lars into the downstairs bedroom later this week. It has everything you might need, Lars, a proper bed, medical supplies, and a more private bathroom setup." Lars blinked, realizing she was referring to the room her late husband had used during his battle with dementia. The thought made him uneasy, but he chose not to argue. "That room will also give me easier access to help if you need anything at night," Margaret continued. "I've already set aside some supplies, and will keep adding anything else you might need." Lars swallowed hard, feeling overwhelmed by how much Margaret was planning. Laura reached over and squeezed his hand. "It's all for the best," she said softly. "Mom's just trying to make sure you're taken care of." Margaret nodded, setting her coffee down and looking directly at Lars. "And, Lars, I want to reiterate something very important," she said firmly. "As long as you're staying in my house, you are not to tamper with your diaper. I don't want to hear about you trying to take it off, adjust it, or even touch it, do you understand?" Lars' face flushed with embarrassment, and he shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I don't see why that's necessary," he muttered. "It's necessary for your health," Margaret said sharply, her no-nonsense tone cutting through the room. "And it's also necessary to keep my furniture and house protected. Yesterday was proof enough that you're not capable of managing this on your own. From now on, Laura or I will handle every change. Period." Laura nodded in agreement, her voice gentler than her mother's. "Mom's right, Lars. It's just easier this way. You'll get used to it." Lars sighed, knowing he had no real argument. "All right," he said reluctantly. "If that's what you want." Margaret softened slightly, her tone losing its edge. "It's not about what I want, it's about what's best for you, Lars. Trust me, this will make things easier for everyone." Lars stared down at his plate, his cheeks still burning with embarrassment, but Laura gave his hand a reassuring squeeze. "You'll see," she said with a small smile. "Mom's just looking out for you." Chapter 8, Tampering with Trouble. The rest of the day passed uneventfully. Lars tried to focus on the quiet rhythms of the household, but his discomfort with the situation lingered. The thick diaper under his borrowed dress served as a constant reminder of his loss of independence, and Margaret's stern reminders about the rules weighed heavily on his mind. By the time dinner rolled around, Lars was feeling restless. He sat stiffly at the table, aware of every crinkle and shift of the fabric beneath him. Margaret, however, seemed unfazed, chatting easily with Laura about her gardening plans and upcoming projects. After dinner, Lars excused himself to the guest room, hoping to find a moment of solitude. But as he settled into the armchair, the feeling of the diaper pressed against his skin made him frown. The padded bulk was still something he hadn't fully adjusted to, and he found himself itching to at least loosen the tapes. Margaret's voice echoed in his mind. "Don't tamper with your diaper." But as the minutes passed, the irritation grew. He convinced himself that just a small adjustment wouldn't hurt. It wasn't like he was taking it off completely. Carefully, Lars reached under the hem of the dress and tugged at one of the tapes. The adhesive came undone with a soft ripping sound, and he hesitated, his heart pounding. Emboldened by the moment, he began loosening the other side. Just as he was fumbling with the second tape, the door creaked open. Lars froze, his hand still under the dress, as Margaret stepped into the room. Her sharp gaze immediately zeroed in on him, and her expression hardened. "Lars," she said, her voice low and firm. "What do you think you're doing?"
I wasn't," Lars stammered, his face flushing red.
It was uncomfortable." Margaret crossed the room in swift, determined strides. "Uncomfortable or not, I made myself very clear, didn't I?" She stood over him, her presence both commanding and deeply maternal. Lars felt like a scolded child, unable to meet her gaze. I wasn't trying to take it off completely, he muttered. But you were tampering with it, Margaret snapped. She took a deep breath, her tone softening slightly. Lars, I told you this rule is for your health and well-being. Do you want to risk another accident? Or worse, irritation or an infection? I didn't think it would matter, Lars mumbled. It does matter, Margaret said firmly. She sighed and placed her hands on her hips. All right, this is what we're going to do. Since you've shown me you can't follow this rule on your own, I'll need to take extra precautions. What do you mean? Lars asked hesitantly. Margaret straightened, her tone calm but resolute. You'll be moving to the downstairs room starting tonight. It's safer for you there, and it's already set up with the supplies we need to ensure this doesn't happen again. Lars' eyes widened. Wait, the downstairs room? Isn't that? Yes, it's the room my husband used, Margaret said evenly. It has everything necessary to keep you comfortable and safe, including the proper restraints to prevent tampering with your diaper. Restraints? Lars echoed, his voice faltering. Margaret nodded. Nothing extreme, Lars. Just the mittens and bed straps to ensure you don't harm yourself or compromise your care while sleeping. I used them with my husband during his final years. They're designed for safety, not punishment. Lars turned to Laura, his eyes pleading. Laura, do you really think this is necessary? Laura hesitated, glancing between her husband and her mother. I think Mom's right, she said gently. We don't want you getting hurt, Lars. And you did agree to let her take care of you while we're here. Lars slumped back in the chair, his shoulders sagging with defeat. I guess I don't have a choice. Margaret's expression softened slightly as she patted his shoulder. It's for the best, Lars. You'll see. Let's get you settled downstairs. Chapter 9, The Dementia Room. Margaret wasted no time. After a brief discussion with Laura, she took Lars by the hand and led him downstairs. The guest room had been serviceable enough, but the downstairs bedroom, which had once been used by Margaret's late husband during his final years, was an entirely different story. The room was pristine, with light blue walls and wooden furniture polished to a soft gleam. A sturdy hospital-style bed dominated the space, equipped with side rails and a set of soft yet firm straps at the corners. A dresser stood nearby, its drawers partially open to reveal neatly folded medical supplies. On a side table rested a small stack of the thick diapers Lars had become all too familiar with, alongside powder, cream, and wipes. This is where you'll be staying from now on, Margaret said, her tone calm but resolute. She moved toward the bed, patting its side. It's safe, comfortable, and set up for everything we need to keep you healthy. Lars hesitated in the doorway, his gaze flicking nervously to the straps on the bed. Is this really necessary? Margaret turned to him, her expression softening. Lars, I understand this might feel overwhelming, but it's for your own good. Laura stepped into the room, wrapping an arm around Lars' shoulder. She's right, honey, she said gently. Margaret gestured to the dresser. And don't think of this as punishment, Lars. It's about creating a routine that keeps you comfortable. My husband spent his last years in this room, and he found it very comforting. Still feeling apprehensive, Lars allowed himself to be led to the bed. Margaret helped him sit down, the familiar crinkle of his diaper amplifying the tension he felt. We'll keep things simple for now, Margaret said, kneeling to examine the straps at the foot of the bed. The restraints are soft, and you won't even notice them once you're settled. They're only there to ensure you stay safe during the night. Chapter 10, Lars Gets Mitten Restraints. Once Lars was seated on the bed, Margaret moved with calm efficiency, unfastening his dress and carefully folding it. She inspected his diaper, giving it a gentle pat before nodding approvingly. You are wet, she murmured. Let's make sure you're properly prepped for the night. Lars blushed as Margaret reached for the nearby supplies, her hands moving with the precision of her nursing background. She dusted a light layer of powder over his diaper area before pulling out a pair of mitten restraints. "These are for your hands," she explained. "They'll keep you from tampering with your diaper while you sleep." Lars hesitated, looking at the padded mittens with unease. "Do I really have to wear those?" Margaret smiled patiently. "Yes, Lars. I wouldn't be suggesting this if it wasn't necessary. And you'll still have plenty of movement, you just won't be able to undo your tapes." Laura stepped closer, taking one of Lars' hands and giving it a reassuring squeeze. "Trust us, it's not a big deal." Reluctantly, Lars allowed Margaret to slide the mittens over his hands, securing them snugly. The soft padding made his hands feel bulky and awkward, and he flexed his fingers experimentally, realizing how little grip he had. Margaret helped him lie back on the bed, her movements calm and deliberate. She fastened the straps around his wrists and ankles, making sure they were secure but not too tight. "There we go," she said softly. "All set for a good night's sleep." Chapter 11: A Restful Surrender. As Margaret finished her work, Laura sat on the edge of the bed, brushing a hand through Lars' hair. "You're doing great," she said with a small smile. "This is just to make sure you're safe, okay?" Lars nodded hesitantly, still feeling the weight of his situation. The straps weren't uncomfortable, but the lack of freedom made him feel more vulnerable than ever. Margaret must have sensed his unease, because she leaned over and patted his shoulder. "You're in good hands, Lars," she said warmly. "Let's focus on keeping you healthy and rested. That's all that matters." As Margaret and Laura stepped back, Lars found himself relaxing slightly, the soft bedding and their reassuring words easing his nerves. Though the situation still felt surreal, he reminded himself to trust their care. Margaret switched off the overhead light, leaving a small lamp glowing softly in the corner. "Good night, Lars," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "We'll check on you in the morning." As they left the room, Lars stared up at the ceiling, the mittens warm against his hands and the straps snug around his limbs. And as the quiet of the night settled over him, he closed his eyes, letting himself drift into an uneasy but restful sleep. Thanks so much for watching today. We hope you enjoyed this week's story and found it relatable, informative, or just a little comforting. Remember, we post new videos every week, so if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. If you found this helpful or know someone who might, don't forget to like the video and share it with your community. Your support means everything and helps us keep creating content just for you. Until next time, take care and stay true to yourself.